The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the Sterling as David's words echoed through the restaurant's dining room. "Find your own way home, Emma. Maybe this will teach you to stop embarrassing me in public." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of his Mercedes engine roaring to life outside the bar, floor-to-ceiling windows confirmed what my mind refused to accept. My husband of 8 years had just abandoned me at the most expensive restaurant in downtown Seattle, 43 miles from our Bellevue home, with nothing but a clutch purse containing my lipstick and exactly $27 in cash. The maître d' approached cautiously, his practiced smile wavering as he surveyed the sparkling glass scattered around my designer heels. Other diners pretended not to stare while their conversations dropped to whispers, and I realized with burning humiliation that I had become the evening's entertainment. My hands trembled as I crouched to collect the larger pieces of crystal, my mind racing through the impossible math of getting home without my phone, without my credit cards, without my dignity. The argument had started innocently enough during our anniversary dinner, a tradition David insisted we maintain at the Sterling every October 15th. He'd been describing his latest architectural project to the couple at the neighboring table, his voice carrying that particular tone of superiority I'd grown to recognize over the years. When Mrs. Patterson from the adjacent table mentioned her daughter's struggling catering business, I'd made the mistake of suggesting that David might consider hiring local caterers for his firm's events, instead of the corporate chains he typically used. The temperature at our table dropped instantly. David's jaw tightened in that familiar way that signaled I'd overstepped some invisible boundary, though I couldn't fathom what I'd done wrong. His response came in measured tones that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. "Emma doesn't understand business matters," he told the Pattersons with a tight smile. "She's never worked outside the home, so she doesn't grasp the complexities of vendor relationships and liability issues." Heat flooded my cheeks as I opened my mouth to respond, but David continued smoothly. "It's charming, really, how she thinks running a household qualifies her to give business advice." The Pattersons exchanged uncomfortable glances while I sat frozen, my face burning with humiliation. I'd spent 6 years managing David's social calendar, coordinating dinners for his clients, researching venues and menus, essentially functioning as his unpaid event coordinator, yet here he was dismissing my contributions as amateur hour. When I excused myself to the restroom, David followed, cornering me in the restaurant's elegant hallway. "What exactly did you think you were doing out there?" His voice was low but furious, making me look incompetent in front of potential clients? Mrs. Patterson's husband owns half the commercial real estate in Eastside. Do you have any idea how damaging your little suggestions could be to my reputation? Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was 8 years of accumulated frustration, but I found myself speaking words I'd swallowed countless times before. "I was trying to help, David. I always try to help, but apparently everything I do is wrong. Can't have opinions about your work. I can't pursue my own interests. I can't even order my own meal without you correcting my choices." His expression darkened. "Your interests? You mean like that ridiculous cooking phase you went through last year? Or the time you wanted to volunteer at the food bank and I had to explain why that would reflect poorly on our social standing? You live in a fantasy world, Emma. You have no idea what it takes to maintain our lifestyle." The cooking phase. He'd reduced 3 months of culinary classes I'd secretly enrolled in to a phase, dismissing the joy I'd found in creating something beautiful and nourishing with my own hands. I'd been forced to quit when he'd discovered the tuition charges on our credit card statement, enduring a lecture about fiscal responsibility while he bought his 3rd watch that same month. "I just thought," I began, but David cut me off with a sharp gesture. "That's the problem. You don't think. You react emotionally without considering consequences. Like right now, making a scene in a public place where people know us." He straightened his tie, a gesture I recognized as his way of regaining control. "We're going back to our table. You're going to apologize to the Pattersons for your inappropriate comments, and we're going to finish this dinner like civilized adults." But something had shifted inside me during those moments in the hallway. The words came out before I could stop them. "No, David. I'm not apologizing for trying to support a local business. I'm not apologizing for having thoughts of my own. And I'm definitely not going to sit there and smile while you treat me like a child who doesn't know better." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. David's face cycled through surprise, anger, and finally cold calculation. "Fine," he said, his voice eerily calm. "If you want to act like a child, you can figure out how to get home like one too." He'd returned to our table alone, made polite excuses about my sudden illness, paid the check with theatrical concern for his overwrought wife, and left me standing in that hallway trying to process what had just happened. By the time I'd up at sea, gathered enough composure to return to the dining room, he was gone, and the maitre d' was approaching with David's message that I would be making alternative arrangements for transportation. Now, crouched on the restaurant floor collecting pieces of shattered crystal, I felt my old life crumbling with the same sharp finality. The maitre d', whose nameplate read Philippe, extended a white cloth napkin toward me with genuine kindness in his eyes. "Madame, please allow our staff to handle this. Perhaps you would be more comfortable in our private dining room while you arrange your transportation." His tactful offer of privacy felt like a lifeline. I nodded gratefully, allowing him to guide me away from the curious stares and whispered conversations. The private dining room was mercifully empty, decorated in warm burgundy and gold tones that should have felt elegant, but instead emphasized my isolation. Philippe brought me a glass of water and discreetly closed the door, leaving me alone with the magnitude of my situation. I opened my small clutch, confirming what I already knew. $27, a lipstick, breath mints, and my house key, attached to a small silver charm David had given me on our 3rd anniversary. No phone because David had insisted on carrying it in his jacket pocket to prevent interruptions during dinner. No credit cards because he managed all our finances and preferred to handle payments himself. No identification beyond the small emergency card I'd hidden behind my driver's license, forgotten until this moment. The emergency card contained one phone number I'd written in tiny print 3 years ago during a particularly difficult period in our marriage. Marcus Thompson, followed by 10 digits I'd memorized but never used. I'd met Marcus during those secret cooking classes, where he'd been a guest instructor teaching advanced sauce techniques. He was a private chef who worked for Seattle's elite, but more importantly, he'd been the first person in years to treat my questions and observations as valuable rather than foolish. During our brief conversations after class, Marcus had mentioned that he understood difficult family situations, having grown up in foster care before finding his calling in professional kitchens. When he'd casually mentioned that he was always available to help former students, I'd impulsively written down his number, telling myself it was just networking. Now, staring at those faded digits, I realized it might be my only option. The restaurant's house phone sat on a small side table, its presence both intimidating and promising. Could I really call someone I'd known for just a few weeks 3 years ago? What would I even say? The alternative, however, was calling my sister in Portland, which would result in a 3-hour lecture about David's controlling behavior. Or my mother, who would somehow make this entire situation my fault, while driving up from Tacoma with disapproving commentary for the entire trip. I dialed Marcus's number before I could talk myself out of it, each ring amplifying my anxiety. On the 4th ring, a familiar voice answered, warm and slightly puzzled. "Marcus Thompson." "Marcus, this is Emma Rodriguez. We met at the Culinary Institute 3 years ago. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm in a really strange situation and I didn't know who else to call." The words tumbled out in a rush, my voice shaking with embarrassment and desperation. "Emma, of course I remember you. You made the most incredible beurre blanc on your first try. What's going on? You sound upset. His genuine concern nearly broke my composure. I'm stranded at the Sterling downtown. My husband and I had a fight, and he left me here without my phone or credit cards or any way to get home. I know this is presumptuous, but you mentioned once that you helped former students, and I just didn't know who else to call. The pause on the other end felt eternal, but when Marcus spoke again, his voice carried immediate resolve. Stay exactly where you are. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't leave with anyone else. Don't accept rides from strangers. Just wait. For me in the restaurant. I'm driving a black Honda CR-V, and I'll come inside to get you. Relief flooded through me so completely that tears sprang to my eyes. Marcus, I can't thank you enough. I'll pay you back for gas. I'll figure out a way to compensate you for your time. Emma, stop. We'll worry about details later. Right now, just focus on staying safe. I'll see you soon. The 20 minutes that followed felt like hours. Sat in the private dining room, alternating between gratitude for Marcus's kindness and mortification at my circumstances. How had my life become so constrained that I had only one person's phone number memorized besides family members? When had I become so isolated that a near stranger was my best option for help? Through the dining room's windows, I watched Seattle's evening traffic flow past in rivers of red and white light. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Couples walked by holding hands, friends laughed together outside the theater district, people living normal lives where their partners didn't abandon them over dinner conversations. The contrast between their apparent freedom and my trapped existence felt overwhelming. Philippe checked on me twice, bringing fresh water and a small plate of the restaurant's signature bread rolls. His professional discretion impressed me. He offered assistance without prying into my circumstances, treating me with the same courtesy he'd show any guest despite the unusual situation. When I thanked him for his kindness, he simply nodded and said, "Sometimes we all need a moment of grace, madame." Exactly 19 minutes after our phone call, I saw Marcus enter the restaurant's main dining room, scanning the space with focused attention. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall and lean, with calloused hands that spoke of years in professional kitchens, short dark hair slightly mussed, and the kind of confident posture that came from successfully managing chaotic dinner services night after night. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, somehow managing to look both casual and elegant in the Sterling's formal atmosphere. Philippe approached him immediately, and I watched them exchange a few quiet words before Marcus nodded in my direction. As he walked toward the private dining room, his expression shifted from concern to something that looked like carefully controlled anger. Not anger at me, I realized, but at the situation, at the person who'd left me stranded, at the casual cruelty that had brought us to this moment. "Emma," he said as he entered the room, his voice gentle despite the tension in his shoulders. "Are you hurt? Are you okay physically?" The simple directness of his questions, his immediate focus on my well-being rather than the drama of the situation, nearly undid me again. "I'm fine physically. Just humiliated and scared and angry and grateful that you came." I stood up, smoothing my dress nervously. "I can't believe I called you. I can't believe you actually came." Marcus studied my face for a moment, and I had the strange sensation that he was reading more than I'd intended to reveal. "Of course I came. No one should be left stranded like this, especially not by someone who's supposed to care about them." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight? Somewhere he won't follow you to continue this fight?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the immediate problem of getting home that I hadn't considered what would happen once I arrived. David would be there, probably having convinced himself that this had all been a reasonable response to my inappropriate behavior. he'd expect me to apologize, to acknowledge that I'd learned my lesson about speaking out of turn. The thought of walking into that conversation made my stomach clench with dread. I don't know, I admitted. I hadn't thought beyond getting home. But you're right. He'll want to discuss this, and I'm not ready for that conversation yet. Marcus nodded as if he'd expected this answer. I have a guest room above my restaurant. It's small but comfortable, and you'd be welcome to stay there tonight if you need space to think things through. No expectations, no obligations. Just a safe place to process what happened and decide what you want to do next. His offer was so unexpectedly generous that I felt tears threatening again. In 8 years of marriage, David had never once offered me space to think when we disagreed. Conflicts were resolved immediately, usually with my capitulation and apology. The idea of having time to process my emotions without pressure to reach a predetermined conclusion felt revolutionary. I couldn't impose like that, I started, but Marcus held up a hand. You're not imposing. 3 years ago, you spent an entire evening helping me modify a sauce recipe for a client with dietary restrictions, staying late after class without any expectation of compensation. You probably don't even remember, but you saved my reputation with an important client. I've been looking for a chance to return the favor ever since. I did remember that evening, though I'd assumed it was forgotten. Mrs. Chen had severe allergies but wanted to serve her daughter's favorite béarnaise sauce at an engagement party. Marcus had been struggling to create a version that would be both safe and delicious, and I'd suggested substituting aquafaba for egg yolks, a technique I'd read about in a food science magazine. We'd spent 2 hours perfecting the recipe, and I'd left feeling more intellectually engaged than I had in months. That was nothing, I protested. You're talking about letting a virtual stranger stay in your home. You're not a stranger, Emma. You're someone who loves food, who thinks creatively about flavors and techniques, who treated an overwhelmed chef instructor with kindness when you didn't have to. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Marcus glanced toward the restaurant's main dining room, where normal people were finishing normal dinners with partners who wouldn't abandon them. Look, I don't know the details of your marriage, and it's not my business, but I do know that what happened tonight isn't normal or acceptable. You deserve better than this. His words hit me with unexpected force because no one had ever said them to me before. Not my family, who viewed David's success as adequate compensation for his controlling behavior. Not my former friends, most of whom had gradually drifted away as David made social situations increasingly uncomfortable with his criticisms and corrections. Not the therapist I'd seen briefly before. David convinced me that therapy was a sign of personal weakness rather than strength. Okay, I whispered, the word carrying more weight than I'd intended. Yes, I would appreciate somewhere safe to think tonight. Thank you. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen all evening. Good. Let's get you out of here. He extended his arm formally, as if escorting me to a gala rather than rescuing me from abandonment. My car's right outside. We'll stop by your house first if you want to pick up some clothes and personal items. The thought of facing David tonight made my chest tight with anxiety. I don't think I'm ready for that conversation yet. Then we'll skip it. I keep extra toiletries for catering staff who sometimes crash after late events, and my sister left some clothes in the guest room last month. She's about your size. Marcus guided me toward the restaurant's exit, nodding gratefully to Philippe, who wished us both a good evening with the same professional discretion he'd shown all night. As we stepped outside into Seattle's crisp October air, I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation and fear were still there, but underneath them was something new, a small spark of possibility I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since my wedding day, I was walking into an unknown situation where someone expected nothing from me except my safety and well-being. Marcus's Honda was exactly as he'd described, clean and practical with a few boxes of cooking equipment in the back seat. As he held the passenger door open for me, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the car's window. The woman looking back at me appeared fragile and uncertain, but there was something else there too. A hint of the person I'd been before I'd learned to make myself smaller to accommodate David's need to be larger. "Ready?" Marcus asked, and I nodded, settling into the passenger seat as he started the engine. As we pulled away from the Sterling, I realized I was riding towards something rather than just away from something. The distinction felt monumental, like the difference between falling and flying. For the first time in 8 years, I was making a choice based on what I needed, rather than what someone else expected from me. The city lights blurred past the windows as we drove through downtown Seattle toward Marcus's restaurant in the capital, Hill neighborhood. He kept the radio low and didn't pressure me to talk, seeming to understand that I was processing more than just the evening's events. I was beginning to understand that everything I'd accepted as normal in my marriage had actually been a carefully constructed cage, and tonight's abandonment had been the key that finally unlocked the door. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. Marcus's restaurant, Harvest Kitchen, occupied the ground floor of a converted brick warehouse in Capitol Hill, its warm amber light spilling onto the sidewalk through large industrial windows. Even at this late hour, the space buzzed with quiet activity as the evening cleanup crew finished their tasks. The scent of herbs and caramelized onions lingered in the air, mixed with the sharp cleanliness of sanitizer and the earthy aroma of fresh bread that must have been prepared for tomorrow's service. "Welcome to my world," Marcus said as he unlocked the front door, gesturing me inside with a pride that made the space feel immediately welcoming rather than intimidating. The dining room was smaller than the Sterling, but infinitely more inviting, with exposed brick walls lined with photographs of local farms and farmers, reclaimed wood tables that bore the honest scratches of thousands of meals, and an open kitchen, where I could see the gleaming equipment that produced the magic I'd witnessed during our cooking classes. A young woman with flour-dusted aprons emerged from the kitchen, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and her face brightening when she saw Marcus. "Chef, I wasn't expecting you back tonight. The evening service went perfectly, and Miguel finished the prep list for tomorrow's lunch special." Her curious glance traveled to me, taking in my formal dress and obvious distress, with the kind of intuitive assessment that came from years in hospitality. "Sophia, this is Emma Rodriguez. She's going to be staying in the upstairs guest room tonight. Emma, Sophia Williams is my sous chef and the person who actually keeps this place running while I take credit for her brilliance." Marcus's introduction carried genuine affection and respect, a stark contrast to the way David typically spoke about his employees as interchangeable resources rather than valued team members. Sophia extended a warm smile and a hand that bore the small burns and cuts. That marked a working chef. "Any friend of Marcus is welcome here. Are you hungry? I just pulled a batch of our rosemary focaccia from the oven, and there's leftover butternut squash soup that's honestly better on the second day." The simple offer of food brought tears to my eyes again, though I tried to hide them by looking down at my hands. When had someone last offered me something without expecting anything in return? When had anyone asked what I needed instead of telling me what they thought I should want? "That sounds wonderful," I managed, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I haven't eaten much tonight." Sophia nodded knowingly and disappeared back into the kitchen, returning moments later with a steaming bowl of soup that smelled like autumn, comfort, and a thick slice of bread that was still warm from the oven. She set them on one of the dining tables along with a cloth napkin and silverware, creating an impromptu place setting that felt more welcoming than the elaborate formal dining I'd left behind at the Sterling. As I tasted the soup, flavors exploded across my palate in ways that made me understand why Marcus had earned his reputation among Seattle's culinary elite. The butternut squash had been roasted until caramelized, then pureed with coconut milk and subtle spices that warmed without. Overwhelming. Fresh sage leaves floated on the surface, their earthy aroma rising with the steam. The focaccia was equally remarkable, its crust crackling to reveal a tender interior studded with rosemary and coarse sea salt. "This is incredible," I said, genuinely amazed. The depth of flavor, the way the spices build on each other instead of competing. How do you achieve that balance? Sophia's face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that came from someone passionate about their craft. The secret is layering the flavors at different stages. We roast the squash with cinnamon and nutmeg, add cardamom to the coconut milk while it reduces, then finish with white pepper and a touch of maple syrup just before serving. Each component gets to develop fully before we combine them. I found myself leaning forward, genuinely engaged in a way I hadn't felt in years. Do you do this with other soups? The technique of building flavors in stages rather than combining everything at once? Absolutely. Marcus taught me that cooking is chemistry, but great cooking is understanding how those chemical reactions build on each other to create something bigger than the sum of its parts. Sophia glanced at Marcus, who was watching our conversation, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Are you a chef too?" The question hit me unexpectedly. Not professionally. I took some classes a few years ago, but my husband thought it was impractical to pursue cooking when we didn't need the income. The words came out automatically, the explanation I'd given so many times that it felt rehearsed. But hearing myself say them now, in this space filled with people who'd turned their passion into purpose, I realized how hollow they sounded. Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't comment directly on David's dismissive attitude. Instead, she asked, "What kind of cooking did you enjoy most in your classes?" I thought back to those few months of freedom, remembering the joy I'd felt experimenting with different techniques and flavors. I loved sauce work. There was something meditative about the precision required, the way you had to pay attention to temperature and timing, how small adjustments could completely transform a dish. But I also enjoyed bread baking. The science of fermentation fascinated me. Marcus and Sophia exchanged a glance that carried some kind of silent communication. "Would you like to see our prep kitchen?" Marcus asked. "We do all our bread baking there, and Sophia's been developing a new line of mother sauces for our catering menu." Following them through the restaurant felt like stepping into a different world. The prep kitchen was a marvel of efficiency and organization, with multiple stations dedicated to different tasks. Massive stand mixers stood ready for tomorrow's bread production, while a collection of immersion circulators indicated the sophisticated sous vide techniques that elevated their catering offerings. Every surface gleamed with cleanliness, and ingredients were organized with the kind of systematic precision that spoke to serious professional standards. "We make everything from scratch here," Sophia explained, opening one of the large refrigeration units to show me containers of stocks in various stages of development. "These beef bones have been roasting for 6 hours before we even start the stock process. The chicken stock simmers for 18 hours. We make our own vinegars, cure our own meats, even grow microgreens in the window boxes upstairs." The level of craft and dedication overwhelmed me. In my marriage to David, convenience had always trumped quality. We ordered takeout from expensive restaurants or hired caterers for entertaining, but we never created anything ourselves. David considered cooking a waste of time when restaurants could provide superior results with less effort. Standing in this kitchen, surrounded by evidence of passionate craftsmanship, I realized how much richness we'd sacrificed for efficiency. "The guest room is just up these stairs," Marcus said, leading me to a narrow staircase tucked behind the prep kitchen. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and comfortable. The bathroom is shared with my apartment, but I'm usually at the restaurant until late and up early, so you'll have plenty of privacy." The guest room was indeed simple, but it possessed a warmth that our Bellevue house had never achieved despite its designer furnishings. A queen bed covered with a hand-quilted comforter dominated the space, flanked by a small nightstand and reading lamp. A vintage dresser held a few books about cooking and food history. while the single window offered a view of the neighborhood's tree-lined streets. Fresh towels sat folded on the dresser next to a small basket containing travel-sized toiletries and what appeared to be women's clothing. Sophia was right about her sister's clothes, Marcus said, noting my glance toward the basket. She's in grad school at UW and crashes here sometimes after late study sessions. She said you're welcome to borrow whatever you need. He paused. At the doorway, his expression serious but kind. Emma, I want you to know that you're safe here. No one will contact your husband or tell him where you are unless you specifically ask us to. This is your space for as long as you need it. The simple statement carried more weight than he probably realized. When had anyone last offered me unconditional safety? When had I been given space to exist without having to manage someone else's expectations or emotions? Thank you, I whispered, the words inadequate for the gratitude I felt. I don't understand why you're being so kind to me. Marcus smiled gently. Because everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're struggling. And because I recognize something in you that I saw in myself years ago when I was trying to figure out who I was, separate from what other people expected me to be. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process the evening's events. 12 hours ago, I'd been preparing for another anniversary dinner, another performance of the perfect wife role that had become so automatic I'd forgotten it was a performance. Now I was sitting in a stranger's guest room, wearing a borrowed sweater that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, having tasted food that reminded me why cooking could be an art form rather than just a chore. I explored the small bathroom, marveling at the simple luxury of choosing my own skincare routine without David's commentary about waste or efficiency. The shower was small but had excellent water pressure, and I stood under the hot spray longer than necessary, letting the heat wash away more than just the day's stress. When I emerged, the mirror reflected a face I barely recognized, softer somehow, less guarded than the expression I'd worn for years. The borrowed clothes fit better than expected, loose cotton pants and a soft sweater that prioritized comfort over appearance. In our Bellevue house, I never appeared outside our bedroom wearing anything that wasn't carefully coordinated and appropriate for unexpected visitors or David's critical assessment. These simple garments felt revolutionary in their casualness. Sleep came more easily than I'd expected, perhaps because the exhaustion of the evening had finally caught up with me, or perhaps because the sounds drifting up from the restaurant's final cleanup were oddly comforting. The gentle clatter of dishes being washed, the murmur of staff conversations, the hiss of equipment being sanitized, all spoke to honest work being completed by people who cared about their craft. I woke before dawn to the scent of baking bread, a aroma so rich and yeasty that it pulled me from sleep like the most pleasant alarm clock imaginable. Through the small window, I could see the first hints of sunrise painting the sky soft pink and gold, while below, the restaurant was already coming to life with the quiet efficiency of morning prep. After dressing in yesterday's clothes, which felt strangely formal after the comfort of borrowed casual wear, I made my way downstairs to find Marcus already deep in prep work, his hands covered in flour as he shaped what appeared to be artisanal boules for the day's bread service. The sight of him working with such focused intensity reminded me why I'd been drawn to cooking in the first place. The meditative quality of creating something nourishing and beautiful through skill and attention. "Good morning," he said without looking up from his work, somehow sensing my presence. "Coffee's fresh if you're interested. Sophia should be here soon with pastries from our partner bakery down the street." I poured myself coffee from the professional machine, noting how much richer and more complex it tasted than the pre-programmed pod system David preferred at home. The first sip carried notes of chocolate and nuts that I'd never experienced in our kitchen, where convenience had always trumped quality. "How long have you been awake?" I asked, settling onto a stool where I could watch him work without getting in the way. "About 3 hours. Bread waits for no one, and I like the quiet time in the morning to think through the day's menu and prep requirements." Marcus glanced up briefly, his hands never pausing in their rhythmic shaping motion. Did you sleep okay? I know strange places can be difficult. The concern in his voice was genuine, not the perfunctory politeness I'd grown accustomed to in my marriage. Better than I expected, actually. I think I was more exhausted than I realized. Sophia arrived as promised, carrying boxes that filled the kitchen with the scent of butter and sugar. Good morning, Emma. I brought an assortment since I wasn't sure what you'd like. We have almond croissants, blueberry scones, and cinnamon rolls that are honestly dangerous. As she unpacked the pastries, I was struck again by the culture of generosity that seemed to permeate this place. No one questioned my presence or made me feel like an imposition. They simply included me in their morning routine as if I belonged there. Emma was asking about sauce techniques last night, Marcus said to Sophia as he moved his shaped loaves to proofing baskets. I thought you might show her your hollandaise method if she's interested. Sophia's face brightened immediately. Are you interested in learning some techniques? We're prepping for a brunch catering order this afternoon, so I'll be making several sauce bases anyway. The offer surprised me. You wouldn't mind teaching me? I don't want to slow down your work. Are you kidding? Teaching is one of my favorite parts of this job. Plus, extra hands are always welcome during prep, even if they're just observing and asking questions. Sophia was already gathering ingredients, her movements efficient and purposeful. Besides, Marcus told me you helped him solve that aquafaba béarnaise challenge a few years ago. Anyone who thinks that creatively about food chemistry is someone I want to learn from too. The next few hours passed in a blur of learning and discovery. Sophia's teaching style was patient and thorough, explaining not just the what, but the why behind each technique. She showed me how to achieve the perfect emulsion for hollandaise, how temperature control could make the difference between success and disaster, how to rescue a broken sauce through understanding rather than panic. More importantly, she included me in the decision-making process rather than simply demonstrating. What do you think would happen if we added the butter too quickly here? She'd ask. Or, how do you think we could modify this technique for someone with egg allergies? Her questions engaged my mind in ways that made me realize how intellectually starved I'd been in my marriage. As the morning progressed, other staff members arrived for the day shift, and I was struck by the camaraderie and mutual respect that characterized their interactions. Everyone from the dishwasher to the senior line cook was treated with dignity and their contributions acknowledged. Marcus remembered personal details about his employees' lives, asked about their families, celebrated their achievements both in and out of the kitchen. The contrast with David's management style was stark. At his architectural firm, David maintained rigid hierarchies and rarely socialized with employees he considered beneath his level. He spoke about his staff in terms of their utility to his projects rather than their value as individuals. Watching Marcus lead through collaboration rather than domination showed me a completely different model of how successful people could behave. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my stomach clench with anxiety. David had apparently realized that his intimidation tactic had backfired and was now trying a different approach. Emma, I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I realize we both said things we didn't mean. Come home so we can talk this through like adults. I'm willing to listen to your perspective. The message was vintage David, acknowledging fault just enough to appear reasonable while implying that my response had been equally inappropriate. The phrase, willing to listen, particularly stung, suggesting that my perspective was a favor he might grant, rather than something I had a right to express. Sophia noticed my expression change as I read the message. Bad news? I showed her the text, uncertain why I felt comfortable sharing such personal information with someone I barely knew. Perhaps it was because she'd spent the morning treating me like an intelligent adult capable of learning and contributing, making David's condescension feel even more glaringly obvious by contrast. Sophia read the message with a frown that deepened as she reached the end. Wow. That's some masterful manipulation right there. He acknowledges just enough fault to seem reasonable while making it sound like you were equally wrong, and he's being generous by offering to hear your side. Her analysis was so precise that I felt a shock of recognition. You can see that in just one text message? I dated a guy like this for 2 years, Sophia said grimly. They all use the same playbook. Make you feel crazy for having normal reactions to abnormal behavior, then position themselves as the reasonable one who's trying to fix the relationship despite your unreasonable demands. Marcus approached our station, having finished his bread preparation. Everything okay over here? Sophia showed him the text without asking my permission, and I realized I didn't mind. In my marriage, sharing David's communications with others would have been considered a betrayal of his privacy. Here, it felt like accessing a support system I hadn't known I needed. Marcus's jaw tightened as he read David's message. Are you planning to respond? The question caught me off guard because it assumed I had a choice in the matter. In my marriage, not responding to David's communications was never an option. He expected immediate acknowledgement and rapid resolution of any conflict, usually through my capitulation and apology. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to go back and try to work things out. We've been married for 8 years. That has to count for something, right? Sophia and Marcus exchanged a glance that carried volumes of silent communication. Sophia spoke first, her voice gentle but firm. Emma, can I ask you something? In those 8 years, how many times have you tried to work things out? How many times have you adjusted your behavior, apologized for having needs or opinions, made yourself smaller to keep the peace? The question hit me like cold water. I don't know. I never counted. And how many times has he made similar adjustments for you? How often has he apologized for dismissing your ideas or controlling your choices? I opened my mouth to respond, then closed. As I realized I couldn't think of a single example. David had occasionally acknowledged being stressed or tired when his behavior was particularly harsh, but he'd never actually apologized for the underlying patterns of control and dismissal that characterized our relationship. Marcus leaned against the prep counter, his expression thoughtful. Emma, I don't know your husband, so I can't judge the specifics of your relationship, but I can tell you that healthy partnerships don't involve abandoning people in restaurants as punishment for having different opinions. And healthy communication doesn't start with psychological manipulation designed to make you question your own perceptions. His words carried the weight of lived experience, not just theoretical knowledge. How do you know so much about this? I asked. Because I grew up in foster care with families who used similar tactics to maintain control. I learned early that some people's version of love comes with conditions that require you to become someone else to keep them happy. Marcus paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. The difference is that as a kid I didn't have choices. As an adult, you do. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the lunch prep crew, and I found myself swept into the bustling energy of restaurant preparation. Sophia assigned me simple tasks that made me feel useful rather than decorative, chopping vegetables with the proper knife techniques she demonstrated, organizing mise-en-place stations according to the systematic approach that prevented chaos during service. Working alongside the kitchen staff, I experienced a sense of purpose and collaboration that had been missing from my life for years. Everyone had clearly defined roles, but those roles were respected rather than dismissed. The dishwasher's efficiency was as valued as the sous chef's creativity. My contributions, however small, were acknowledged and appreciated. As lunch service began, I watched from the pass as orders flowed in, and the kitchen transformed into a well-orchestrated dance of efficiency and precision. Marcus called out orders while Sophia coordinated the line, each dish assembled with care and attention that elevated simple ingredients into something extraordinary. The energy was intense but positive, driven by pride in craft rather than fear of failure. During a brief lull between the lunch rush and dinner prep, Marcus approached me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emma, I have a proposition for you, but I want you to know there's no pressure to accept and no judgment if you decline." My heart rate accelerated with uncertainty. What kind of proposition? "We're catering a wedding reception this Saturday, and one of our prep cooks called in sick for the rest of the week. The position is temporary, just helping with basic prep work and learning how our catering operation functions. It would give you some time to think through your situation while earning a little money and maybe rediscovering your passion for cooking." The offer was so unexpected that I struggled to process it. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity," Marcus corrected gently. "A chance to remember who you are when you're not trying to be who someone else thinks you should be. No long-term commitment, no complicated paperwork, just honest work in a supportive environment." Sophia had joined our conversation, her enthusiasm evident. "Emma, you've been asking great questions all morning and picking up techniques faster than some culinary school graduates I've worked with. You clearly have natural talent and genuine interest. Why not explore that?" The possibility felt both thrilling and terrifying. When had I last made a decision based purely on my own interests rather than David's approval? When had I last been offered an opportunity that recognized my potential rather than my limitations? "I don't have proper work clothes," I said, grasping for practical obstacles that might excuse my fear. "We have extra chef coats and aprons," Sophia replied immediately. "And comfortable shoes are easy enough to find." "What about David?" "He'll expect me to come home and discuss our relationship." Marcus's expression grew serious. "That's a conversation you'll need to have eventually, but it doesn't have to happen on his timeline or on his terms. You have the right to take time. To think, to figure out what you want rather than just responding to what he demands." The truth of his words settled over me like a revelation. I had been living my entire adult life in reactive mode, responding to David's needs and expectations without ever pausing to consider my own desires. The idea of making proactive choices, based on my own interests, felt revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. If I said yes, I asked carefully, what would the work actually involve? Sophia's smile was immediate and genuine. Basic prep work to start. Chopping vegetables, preparing stocks, learning our systems for inventory and organization. If you're interested in show aptitude, we could teach you more advanced techniques. The catering kitchen has different requirements than restaurant service, so you'd learn a completely different side of professional cooking. "And Marcus," I turned to him with sudden concern, "this isn't charity, is it? I don't want to take a position just because you feel sorry for me." His laugh was warm and genuine. "Emma, I run a business, not a charity. I wouldn't offer you work if I didn't think you could contribute meaningfully. You've already demonstrated more curiosity and learning ability in one morning than some people show in weeks of training." Looking around the kitchen, watching the continued preparation for evening service, feeling the energy of people passionate about their craft, I realized this was the first time in years that someone had offered me something based on my potential rather than my limitations. David had always focused on what I couldn't do, what I shouldn't attempt, what was too risky or impractical for someone in my position. Here, people were asking what I might be capable of if given the chance to grow. "Yes," I said before I could talk myself out of it. "Yes, I'd like to try working here." The smile that crossed Marcus's face was worth every moment of uncertainty I'd felt. "Welcome to Harvest Kitchen, Emma. Let's see what you're really capable of when nobody's telling." "You what you can't do." My first official day at Harvest Kitchen began at 5 in the morning with the sound of delivery trucks rumbling down the alley behind the restaurant. I'd barely slept, my mind cycling between excitement about the opportunity Marcus had offered and anxiety about David's increasingly frequent text messages. He'd graduated from reasonable requests to wounded accusations, each message designed to pull me back into the familiar pattern of guilt and capitulation that had defined our marriage. Sophia greeted me in the prep kitchen with a steaming cup of coffee and a chef's coat that bore the restaurant's logo, a simple wheat stalk intertwined with herbs that spoke to their farm-to-table philosophy. "Ready for your first real day in a professional kitchen?" she asked, her enthusiasm infectious despite the early hour. The coat felt foreign but significant as I buttoned it over my borrowed clothes, like putting on a uniform that represented possibility rather than obligation. In the industrial mirror hanging near the prep station, I caught a glimpse of myself and barely recognized the woman looking back. Gone was the carefully curated appearance David expected, replaced by someone who looked ready to work with her hands and learn something meaningful. Marcus appeared from the walk-in cooler carrying crates of vegetables that would become the day's specials, his movements efficient despite the obvious weight of the boxes. "Emma, your first assignment is learning our mise-en-place system. Everything in a professional kitchen depends on organization and preparation. Sophia will show you how we break down our prep lists and coordinate timing so that every component is ready when service begins." The complexity of restaurant operations became apparent as Sophia walked me through their systematic approach to preparation. Every dish was broken down into its components, each component assigned a prep time and priority level, all coordinated to ensure that hot foods finished cooking just as cold elements reached proper temperature and seasoned items had adequate time to develop their flavors. "The wedding we're catering Saturday serves 150 guests, Sophia explained, showing me the detailed prep schedule that covered 3 full days of preparation. The bride requested a menu that showcases Pacific Northwest ingredients, so we're doing cedar plank salmon with blackberry gastrique, root vegetable gratin with aged cheddar from a local dairy, and wild mushroom risotto with herbs from our own garden. Each dish represented layers of preparation that I'd never considered as a home cook. The cedar planks needed to be soaked for 48 hours. The blackberry gastrique required reducing fresh berries with vinegar and spices, then straining, and cooling to develop proper consistency. The root vegetables had to be precisely cut, blanched separately according to their cooking times, then arranged in specific patterns for optimal presentation. Your job today is learning to brunoise shallots, Sophia continued, demonstrating the precise knife work that created perfectly uniform quarter-inch cubes. We'll need about 4 cups for various components of the wedding menu, and consistency is crucial for both flavor distribution and visual appeal. The knife felt clumsy in my hands initially, my cuts uneven and hesitant compared to Sophia's confident precision. But as the morning progressed, I began to understand the rhythm and technique that professional cooks developed through repetition and attention to detail. Each shallot became an opportunity to improve my knife skills, to understand how proper cuts affected cooking times and flavor release. "Much better," Sophia said, examining my work after an hour of practice. "You're developing a feel for the proper angle and pressure. In professional kitchens, we say that knife skills separate serious cooks from enthusiastic amateurs. You're definitely moving in the right direction." Her encouragement felt more meaningful than any compliment David had given me in years, perhaps because it was based on actual observation of my developing abilities rather than superficial appreciation of my appearance or social performance. Here, praise was earned through skill and effort rather than granted for maintaining an acceptable facade. The morning accelerated as other staff members arrived and the kitchen filled with the controlled chaos of serious preparation. I found myself assigned to a rotating series of tasks that gradually introduced me to different aspects of professional cooking. Under the guidance of Miguel, the senior prep cook, I learned proper techniques for cleaning and storing herbs, how to test the doneness of stocks through sight and smell, and the importance of consistent temperature control in everything from sauce preparation to ingredient storage. Miguel, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who'd worked in restaurants since arriving from El Salvador 20 years earlier, possessed the kind of intuitive understanding of ingredients that came from decades of experience. "Cooking is conversation," He told me as we prepared aromatic vegetables for the stock that would form the base of Saturday's risotto. You must listen to what the food tells you, respond to what it needs. Timer is helpful, but your senses are more important. His philosophy resonated with something I'd felt during my brief cooking classes, but had never been able to articulate. In David's world, everything was about control and predetermined outcomes. Here, success came from paying attention and responding thoughtfully to changing circumstances, skills that translated far beyond the kitchen. As lunch service approached, I was moved to a station where I could observe the transition from preparation to service without interfering with the precise choreography required to execute orders efficiently. The energy in the kitchen shifted dramatically as servers began calling out orders and the line cooks moved into the focused intensity that would carry them through the next 3 hours. Marcus orchestrated the service from the pass, his voice calm but authoritative as he called, out timing for multiple orders simultaneously. I need 2 salmon medium, 1 rare vegetarian pasta no cheese, and the duck special all up in 3 minutes, he announced, his eyes tracking the progress of dishes across multiple stations while ensuring that each plate met their standards. Before leaving the kitchen, the teamwork was extraordinary to witness. Each cook knew their role precisely, but they also supported their colleagues when needed, jumping in to help plate dishes or cover stations when someone fell behind. There was no ego or hierarchy that prevented assistance, just shared commitment to excellent food and smooth service. During a brief lull between lunch and dinner prep, Marcus approached my station where I was learning to prepare the compound butter that would top the wedding's cedar plank salmon. How are you feeling about your first day so far? Overwhelmed. But exhilarated, I answered honestly. I had no idea how much skill and coordination went into professional cooking. It's like watching a ballet where every dancer knows their role but can also improvise when needed. Marcus smiled at the comparison. That's exactly what it is. And like ballet, it looks effortless when done well, but requires enormous amounts of practice and trust between team members. He paused, studying my face with the same attention he paid to evaluating dishes. You're picking things up quickly. Sophia mentioned that your knife work improved dramatically just this morning. The praise sent warmth through my chest, but it was followed immediately by anxiety as my phone buzzed with another message from David. This one was different in tone, more aggressive than his previous attempts at reconciliation. Emma, this silent treatment is juvenile and accomplishes nothing. You've made your point about being independent, but enough is enough. I expect you home tonight so we can resolve this situation like adults. The imperious tone was classic. David, demanding compliance while framing his demands as reasonable expectations. But reading it now, surrounded by people who treated me with respect and encouraged my growth, his controlling language felt almost absurd in its presumption. Marcus noticed my expression change as I read the message. More pressure from home? I showed him the text, no longer feeling the need to hide David's behavior or protect his image. He's escalating because I'm not responding the way he expects. That's what controllers do when their usual tactics stop working, Marcus observed, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. They increase pressure, make bigger demands, try to force you back into the pattern that worked before. How do you know so much about this? I asked, genuinely curious about the experiences that had given him such insight into manipulative behavior. Marcus leaned against the prep counter, his expression growing serious. Because I lived with it for the first 18 years of my life. Foster families who used love as a weapon, social workers who threatened to separate siblings if we didn't comply, group homes where survival meant making yourself invisible to avoid attention from kids or adults who might hurt you. His openness about such painful experiences caught me off guard. David never discussed difficult topics, preferring to maintain the illusion that his life had always been as controlled and successful as it appeared now. How did you survive that? How did you learn to trust people again? Cooking saved me, Marcus said simply. When I aged out of the system at 18, I was angry and defensive, and convinced that everyone would eventually hurt me if I gave them the chance. But I got a job washing dishes at a small restaurant, and the chef there saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He gestured around the kitchen where his staff continued their preparation work, each person focused but relaxed in their expertise. Chef Rodriguez taught me that food is love made tangible, that cooking for people is one of the most fundamental ways humans care for each other. More importantly, he showed me that respect isn't something you have to earn through perfect behavior. It's something you deserve simply by being human. The parallel to my own situation was unmistakable, though I'd never thought of my marriage in terms of earning respect through perfect behavior. But that's exactly what I'd been doing for 8 years, constantly adjusting my responses to maintain David's approval and avoid his criticism. What happened when you started believing you deserved respect? I asked. Everything changed. I started taking classes, developing my skills, building relationships with people who valued me for who I was, rather than how well I met their expectations. Marcus glanced toward the dining room where early dinner customers were beginning to arrive. I also learned to recognize the difference between people who supported my growth and people who tried to limit it. His words hit me with uncomfortable clarity. David had never supported my growth. He'd tolerated my interests when they didn't, interfere with his plans, dismissed them when they required time or resources he preferred to allocate elsewhere, and actively discouraged them when they threatened his control over our life together. Sophia approached our conversation carrying a tray of perfectly julienned vegetables, her knife work so precise that each piece appeared machine-cut. Emma, are you ready to learn blanching techniques? We need to prep the vegetables for tomorrow's gratin. And it's a great opportunity to understand how different cooking methods affect texture and flavor. The transition from personal conversation to professional instruction felt natural rather than jarring, as if the kitchen environment encouraged both authentic communication and focused work. I followed Sophia to the cooking station, where she demonstrated the precise timing required to blanch vegetables to the perfect point between raw and overcooked. The key is understanding that blanching isn't just about partial cooking, she explained, as she plunged carrots into rapidly boiling salted water. It's about setting color, removing raw flavors, and preparing the vegetables to finish cooking properly in their final preparation. Each vegetable required different timing based on its density and size. Carrots needed 3 minutes, Brussels sprouts required 2.5, while delicate asparagus spears were perfect after just 90 seconds. After blanching, everything plunged immediately into ice water to stop the cooking process and preserve the bright colors that would make Saturday's gratin visually stunning. Now you try, Sophia said, handing me the spider strainer and setting a timer. Start with the remaining carrots. Remember, we're looking for tender crisp, not soft. My first attempt was slightly overcooked, the carrots yielding too easily when I tested them with a knife tip. Sophia examined my work without criticism, simply noting that I'd learned to recognize the proper texture with practice and experience. Her response was so different from David's typical reaction to my mistakes that I almost couldn't process it. No irritation, no lecture about paying attention, just acknowledgement that learning required trial and error. As the afternoon progressed, I rotated through different stations, learning aspects of professional cooking that I'd never encountered in my home kitchen or brief cooking classes. The scale of restaurant preparation required different techniques and timing than home cooking. The precision demanded by catering meant that every component had to be executed flawlessly because there was no opportunity to adjust seasoning or presentation once the food left the kitchen. Miguel taught me proper techniques for storing prepared ingredients to maintain quality and prevent contamination. In professional kitchen, we think always about food safety, he explained as we organized tomorrow's prep in carefully labeled containers. Temperature, timing, contamination prevention. This is not just regulation, is respect for people who trust us to feed them well. His perspective on food safety as an expression of respect rather than just regulatory compliance reflected the deeper philosophy that seemed to guide everything at Harvest Kitchen. Every aspect of their operation was considered in terms of how it affected their customers, their staff, and their community, rather than just profit margins or efficiency. The dinner service provided another opportunity to observe the kitchen's transformation from preparation mode to service execution. The energy was different from lunch, more intense and sustained as orders came in faster, and more complex dishes required precise timing across multiple stations. I watched Marcus coordinate the pass with calm authority, his ability to track multiple orders simultaneously while ensuring quality control seeming almost supernatural. When a server mentioned that Table 7 had a severe shellfish allergy, he immediately called out modifications to 3 different stations, ensuring that no cross-contamination could occur without slowing down the overall service. How does he keep track of all those details? I asked Sophia during a brief moment when we weren't actively working on prep for tomorrow. Experience and systems, she replied. But mostly, he genuinely cares about getting every detail right. When you're cooking for people rather than just producing food, you pay attention differently. Her distinction between cooking for people and producing food crystallized something I'd been feeling all day. David approached food as fuel or social currency, choosing restaurants based on their prestige or convenience rather than the quality of ingredients or care in preparation. Here, every dish was crafted with attention to how it would nourish and delight the person eating it. As service wound down and the cleaning routine began, I found myself exhausted, but more energized than I'd felt in years. My body ached from standing and constant movement, my hands bore small cuts from still developing knife skills, and my mind buzzed with new information about techniques and timing. But underneath the physical fatigue was a deep satisfaction that came from meaningful work well done. Marcus approached as I finished helping Sophia organize tomorrow's prep list. How do you feel about your first day in a professional kitchen? Like I've been sleepwalking for 8 years and finally woke up, I answered before I could censor myself. The honesty of my response surprised me, but it felt completely accurate. That's what happens when you start using abilities that have been dormant, Marcus said with understanding. Your brain and body remember what it feels like to be challenged and engaged. My phone buzzed again with another message from David, this one shorter and more ominous than his previous attempts. Emma, I've been patient, but this ends tomorrow. Be home by 6 p.m. or I'll come find you myself. The threat was barely veiled, and for the first time since leaving the Sterling, I felt genuine fear about what David might do if I continued to assert independence. He'd never been physically violent, but his anger when challenged could be intimidating, and his need for control had clearly intensified during my absence. Marcus read the message over my shoulder, his expression hardening. That's not a request. That's a threat. Are you afraid of what he might do if you don't comply? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. I don't think he'd hurt me physically, but he knows how to make my life very difficult when I don't meet his expectations. What kind of difficult? Sophia asked, having joined our conversation with obvious concern. I thought about David's methods of expressing displeasure. The silent treatment that could last for days, the subtle sabotage of plans I'd made independently, the way he'd withdraw affection and support until I apologized for whatever had displeased him. He makes me feel like I'm crazy for having normal reactions to his behavior. He isolates me from friends and activities until I agree that his way is better. That's emotional abuse, Sophia said bluntly. It's designed to make you dependent on his approval and afraid to trust your own judgment. Her direct label for David's behavior shocked me, even though I knew she was right. I'd spent so many years making excuses for his controlling tendencies, explaining them as stress or perfectionism rather than recognizing them as deliberate tactics designed to maintain power over me. The question is, Marcus said gently, What do you want to do about it? You have options now that you didn't have yesterday. For the first time in my adult life, I had earned money through my own work, slept in a space where I felt safe and valued, and spent time with people who encouraged my growth rather than limiting it. The contrast with my marriage was so stark that returning to David felt like choosing to walk back into a cage after discovering I could fly. I want to keep working here, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. I want to learn everything. I can about professional cooking and see what I'm capable of when nobody's telling me I can't do it. Marcus smiled, the expression carrying pride and something that looked like relief. Then that's what we'll do. But you'll need to respond to David eventually. Ignoring him won't make him go away, and his threats suggest he's escalating. What should I say? I asked, genuinely uncertain how to communicate with someone who'd never respected my right to make independent decisions. Sophia pulled out her phone and began typing. How about something like this? David, I need more time to think about our relationship without pressure or ultimatums. I'm safe and will contact you when I'm ready to have a productive conversation. The message was perfect in its simplicity, acknowledging his concern while firmly establishing my right to set the timeline for our communication. It was respectful but not apologetic, clear but not defensive. That's exactly right, I said, copying her words into my own phone. It says what I need to say without giving him ammunition to argue with. As I sent the message, I felt something shift inside me permanently. For the first time in 8 years, I was communicating with David as an equal rather than as someone seeking his permission to exist. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of my own power and worth. The kitchen crew finished their closing duties with the same systematic efficiency they brought to everything else, each person completing their assigned tasks while supporting their colleagues. I helped where I could, learning the importance of leaving each station perfectly clean and organized for the next day's service. As we prepared to leave, Marcus handed me an envelope containing my first day's wages, along with a schedule for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we start the serious preparation for Saturday's wedding. Are you ready for the challenge? Looking around the kitchen that had become a laboratory for discovering my own capabilities, surrounded by people who had welcomed me into their community of craft and care, I felt more ready for challenge than I had in years. Absolutely, I said, meaning it completely. I can't wait to see what I can learn. Walking up the stairs to the guest room, my body tired but my spirit energized, I realized that David's abandonment at the Sterling had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my adult life, the opportunity to discover who I could become when nobody was limiting my possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued learning, but tonight I fell asleep knowing that I had taken the first steps toward building a life based on my own choices rather than someone else's expectations. The transformation had begun, and there was no going back to the woman who had sat frozen in that restaurant just 3 days ago. The next 3 days blurred together in a whirlwind of intensive preparation that pushed my newfound culinary skills to their limits. Saturday's wedding reception loomed like a final exam, and every hour brought new techniques to master and standards to meet. My hands, once soft from a life of leisure, had developed calluses from constant knife work and burns from working around professional-grade equipment. Each mark felt like a badge of competence rather than damage. Thursday morning found me alongside Miguel in the prep kitchen at 4:30, learning the delicate art of smoking salmon on cedar planks. The process required far more finesse than I'd imagined, from selecting planks with the right grain density to achieving the precise temperature that would impart smoky flavor without overwhelming the fish's natural sweetness. Salmon tells you, when ready, Miguel explained as we monitored the temperature probes inserted into each fillet. Color changes, texture firms, but still soft inside. You must trust what you see and feel, not just timer. His philosophy of cooking through intuition rather than rigid rules had become central to my education at Harvest Kitchen. Under his patient guidance, I was learning to recognize the visual and aromatic cues that indicated proper doneness, developing the sensory awareness that separated competent cooks from those who merely followed recipes. Sophia had taken charge of my education in sauce preparation, and her standards were exacting in the best possible way. The blackberry gastrique that would accompany the salmon required 3 separate reductions, each building layers of flavor that would complement rather than compete with the fish. My first attempt resulted in a sauce that was too sweet and lacked the acidic balance that would cut through the salmon's richness. "Taste as you go," Sophia instructed as we prepared my second batch. Professional cooking is constant adjustment and refinement. The berries vary in sweetness depending on their ripeness. The vinegar's acidity changes with temperature, and the reduction process concentrates flavors in ways that can't be predicted exactly. Her teaching method emphasized understanding, over-memorization, encouraging me to develop palate memory that would serve me across different ingredients and preparations. Each sauce became a lesson in balancing sweet, sour, salty, and umami elements to create harmony rather than discord. The complexity of coordinating multiple dishes for 150 guests revealed logistical challenges I'd never considered. Every component had to finish at the same temperature and time, requiring backward planning that started with the desired service moment and worked through each preparation step to determine when each task should begin. Marcus had created detailed timeline sheets that looked more like military operation plans than cooking instructions. At 4:15, start the final reduction on the gastrique. At 4:30, begin plating the root vegetable gratin. At 4:45, pull the salmon from the cedar planks and rest for 5 minutes before slicing. Every minute was accounted for, every task assigned to specific team members based on their skills and experience. My role in Saturday's service was primarily support, but Marcus had promised that I'd be responsible for plating the compound butter accompaniment for each salmon dish. The butter itself was a masterpiece of flavor balance, incorporating fresh dill, lemon zest, and a hint of horseradish that would provide just enough heat to enhance the fish without overwhelming delicate palates. Friday's prep day stretched from dawn until nearly midnight as we completed the advance work that would make Saturday's service possible. The root vegetable gratin required precise layering techniques that I practiced until my cuts were uniform, enough to meet Sophia's standards. Each slice of potato, parsnip, and sweet potato had to be exactly 1/8 inch thick to ensure even cooking and proper presentation. Consistency isn't just about appearance, Sophia explained as she checked my work. When vegetables are cut unevenly, they cook at different rates, creating textures that fight each other rather than creating harmony in the dish. Her attention to detail extended beyond technique to the philosophy behind professional cooking. Every decision, from knife cuts to seasoning levels, was made with the diner's experience in mind. The goal wasn't just food that tasted good, but food that created moments of genuine pleasure and surprise. My phone had remained mercifully quiet since sending my message to David 3 days earlier, but that silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. His pattern was to escalate when ignored, and I couldn't shake the feeling that his absence was strategic rather than respectful of my request for space. Marcus noticed my distraction during Friday's evening prep session. "Everything okay? You seem tense." "David hasn't responded to my message," I admitted while carefully arranging herbs for tomorrow's garnish. "That's not like him. He usually has an immediate response to anything that challenges his expectations." "Maybe he's finally realizing that his usual tactics aren't working," Sophia suggested hopefully. She'd become protective of my newfound independence and saw David's controlling behavior with the clarity that came from having escaped a similar relationship herself. But my instincts suggested otherwise. David's silence felt calculated, designed to create anxiety that would drive me to contact him first. His understanding of my psychological patterns was sophisticated after 8 years of marriage, and he knew that uncertainty often motivated me more effectively than direct pressure. "Or maybe he's planning something more dramatic," I said, voicing the fear I'd been trying to suppress. David doesn't accept defeat gracefully. If his usual methods aren't working, he'll escalate to something that forces a response. Marcus paused in his sauce preparation, giving me his full attention. "What kind of escalation are you worried about?" The question forced me to articulate fears I'd been avoiding. He knows where I work now. He could show up here, cause a scene, try to embarrass me into leaving with him. Or he could use his professional connections to damage the restaurant's reputation somehow. David has influential friends in Seattle's business community. The possibility of my personal drama affecting Harvest Kitchen's reputation horrified me more than threats to my own well-being. These people had welcomed me into their professional family, invested time in teaching me skills, and trusted me with responsibilities that mattered to their business success. The idea that David might retaliate against them for supporting my independence felt like a betrayal of their kindness. Sophia's expression hardened with determination. Let him try. We've dealt with difficult customers and problematic situations before. More importantly, you can't live your life afraid of what he might do. That's exactly the kind of control he's trying to maintain. Her words were true, but didn't diminish my anxiety about potential consequences. I'd spent years avoiding David's displeasure by anticipating his reactions and adjusting my behavior accordingly. Breaking that pattern felt like learning to walk, again after years of moving carefully to avoid stumbling. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of October in the Pacific Northwest, perfect weather for an outdoor wedding reception. The catering team assembled at 5 a.m. to begin the final preparations that would culminate in service at a waterfront venue overlooking Elliott Bay. The bride had chosen the location for its sweeping views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains, but the outdoor setting added complexity to our logistical planning. Portable equipment had to be transported and set up to create a full kitchen operation at the venue. Refrigeration units, cooking surfaces, prep tables, and serving stations all required careful coordination to ensure that food safety standards were maintained while delivering the same quality guests would expect from Harvest Kitchen's dining room. My nervousness about performing well in front of wedding guests mixed with excitement about participating in my first major catering event. Everything I'd learned over the past week would be tested under the pressure of real service, where mistakes couldn't be hidden or corrected without affecting the celebration. Marcus gathered the team for a final briefing before we left the restaurant. Today is about executing flawlessly while staying flexible enough to handle unexpected challenges. Emma, you'll be stationed at the plating area where Sophia can guide you through each course. Remember, we're not just serving food, we're contributing to one of the most important days in these people's lives. His reminder about the significance of our work elevated the day beyond mere job performance to something approaching artistry. We weren't just following recipes and procedures. We were crafting experiences that would become part of cherished memories. The venue setup took 3 hours of systematic work, each team member knowing their role in creating a temporary kitchen that could produce restaurant-quality food for 150 guests. I helped establish the plating station where individual portions would be assembled and garnished before service, learning how proper organization prevented chaos during the intense minutes of simultaneous dish preparation. As guests began arriving for the reception, I caught glimpses of the bride and groom through the service tent's opening. They looked radiantly happy, surrounded by family and friends who'd gathered to celebrate their commitment. The responsibility of contributing to their perfect day felt both humbling and motivating. Service began with past appetizers during the cocktail hour, giving our team a chance to warm up before the main course plating that would test our coordination and timing. I watched Sophia and her line cooks work with balletic precision, each person moving efficiently through their assigned tasks while maintaining awareness of their colleagues' progress. When Marcus called for main course plating to begin, the energy in our temporary kitchen transformed into focused intensity. Cedar plank, salmon emerged from the portable smokers, perfectly cooked and aromatic with the woodsy scent that would complement the blackberry gastrique. Root vegetable gratins were pulled from warming ovens, their surfaces golden and bubbling with aged cheddar that had melted into creamy perfection. My role was to add the compound butter medallion to each salmon plate, ensuring that it was positioned consistently and garnished with a sprig of fresh dill that had been selected for uniform size and vibrant color. The repetitive motion became meditative, each plate an opportunity to contribute to the visual beauty that would greet each guest. "Excellent consistency," Sophia said as she quality-checked my work. "You're maintaining the same placement and portion size across all plates. That's the mark of someone who understands professional standards." Her approval sent warmth through my chest that was different from any praise I'd received in my marriage. This recognition was based on observable skill and effort, rather than my ability to meet someone else's expectations of proper behavior. I was being valued for my contributions rather than my compliance. The service continued flawlessly, each course flowing from our temporary kitchen to the dining area where guests celebrated the newlyweds with toasts and laughter. Through the service window, I could see the bride's face light up as she tasted our salmon, her expression of delight validation that our efforts had succeeded in creating something special. As the final dessert plates were served and our breakdown began, I felt the peculiar exhaustion and exhilaration that followed intense performance under pressure. My body ached from hours of standing and repetitive motion, but my spirit soared, with the satisfaction of having contributed meaningfully to a perfect event. Marcus approached the plating station where I was helping Sophia organize equipment for transport back to the restaurant. "Outstanding work today, Emma. You maintained professional standards under pressure and supported the team exactly as we needed. How did it feel?" "Like I found something I didn't know I was looking for," I answered honestly. I never realized how satisfying it could be to create something beautiful that brings people joy. "That's what keeps us all coming back," Marcus said with a smile. "The money is rarely enough to justify the hours and physical demands, but the connection between craft and human happiness makes it worthwhile." As we finished packing the equipment and prepared to return to the restaurant, my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. David had finally broken his silence, but his response was more concerning than I'd anticipated. "Emma, I've been more than patient with this ridiculous phase you're going through. I've spoken with my attorney about our options for resolving this situation. Be at the house tomorrow at 2 p.m. to discuss our marriage like rational adults, or I'll be forced to take steps that neither of us will enjoy." The legal threat was new and terrifying in its implications. David controlled most of our financial assets and had connections throughout Seattle's legal community that could make divorce proceedings extremely difficult if he chose to weaponize them. His message was clearly designed to frighten me into compliance through fear of consequences I couldn't afford to fight. Sophia read the message over my shoulder as we loaded the transport van, her expression growing dark with anger. "That's not a request to discuss your marriage. That's extortion designed to force you into a conversation where he holds all the power." "What kind of legal steps could he actually take?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. Marcus had joined our conversation, his face grim as he considered David's threat. "Probably nothing immediately actionable, but he could file for divorce on terms that favor him, freeze joint accounts, or make claims about your mental state that could complicate your access to shared resources." The reality of my legal vulnerability hit me like cold water. I'd been so focused on my emotional and professional growth that I hadn't considered the practical weapons David could deploy to force my return. Without independent financial resources or legal representation, I was dependent on his goodwill for access to the life we'd built together. "I think I need to go home," I said reluctantly, the words feeling like surrender even as I spoke them. "I can't afford a legal battle, and I don't have the resources to fight whatever he's planning." "Emma, wait," Sophia said urgently. "Going back now, under these conditions, means accepting that he can threaten his way out of any conflict. Once you establish that pattern, he'll use it whenever you assert independence. Her words were true but didn't address my practical reality. David had spent 8 years positioning himself as the financially responsible partner while encouraging my dependence on his resources. Now that dependence had become a cage that I couldn't escape without risking everything I'd need to survive, independently. Marcus was quiet for several moments, his expression thoughtful as he considered options I couldn't see. What if you didn't have to choose between confronting him alone and giving up your independence? What do you mean? I asked, uncertain what alternative he might be suggesting. What if you met with him but not on his terms? What if you controlled the location, the timing, and had support that he couldn't dismiss or intimidate? The idea of facing David with any kind of backup felt both appealing and terrifying. He was skilled at psychological manipulation that was difficult for outsiders to recognize, capable of making me appear unreasonable while positioning himself as the injured party trying to save our marriage. He'd never agree to meet anywhere, except our house, I protested. And he'd view any support I brought as evidence that I've been turned against him by people who don't understand our relationship. Then we don't ask his permission, Sophia said with determination. We show up at his precious meeting with our own agenda and our own terms. Her suggestion was so audacious that I could barely process it. The idea of challenging David's control over the circumstances of our confrontation felt revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. I couldn't ask you to get involved in my personal drama, I said, though part of me desperately wanted the support they were offering. You're not asking, Marcus replied firmly. We're offering because we care about you, and because we've seen what you're capable of when you're not being diminished by someone who should be supporting your growth. The drive back to Harvest Kitchen passed in tense silence as I wrestled with the decision that would determine whether I continued growing into the person I was becoming or retreated into the familiar cage of my marriage. By the time we reached the restaurant, I'd made the choice that would change everything. I want to meet with David, I said as we unloaded equipment in the alley behind the kitchen. But I want to do it here, in the restaurant, where I feel strong and supported. And I want you both there as witnesses to whatever he says or promises. Marcus smiled with something that looked like pride. Now you're thinking like someone who understands her own worth. Let's plan this confrontation so that you control the narrative instead of responding to his. As we entered Harvest Kitchen to begin planning my declaration of independence, I realized that David's threats had inadvertently given me the perfect opportunity to show him exactly how much I'd changed. Tomorrow's meeting wouldn't be the surrender he expected, but the beginning of my new life as a woman who refused to be controlled by fear. Sunday afternoon arrived with the weight of inevitability, every minute bringing me closer to the confrontation. That would determine the trajectory of my future. I'd spent the morning in Harvest Kitchen's prep area, not because any work needed to be done, but because the familiar rhythm of knife work and the scent of fresh herbs calmed my nerves in ways that meditation or deep breathing exercises never could. Marcus had arrived early to help me prepare, both practically and emotionally, for David's expected arrival at 2 o'clock. We'd rearranged the private dining room to create a setting that felt professional rather than intimate, with Sophia positioned discreetly at a nearby table where she could observe our conversation without appearing to eavesdrop. Remember, Marcus said as he adjusted the lighting to ensure nothing felt romantic or nostalgic, you're not trying to save your marriage today. You're establishing the terms under which you're willing to end it. His reminder helped center my focus on the goal I'd sometimes lost sight of during my week of transformation. This wasn't about proving David wrong or making him understand how much he'd hurt me. This was about claiming agency over my own life and refusing to let fear of his disapproval dictate my choices. At exactly 2 o'clock, David's Mercedes pulled into the small parking area behind the restaurant, his punctuality as predictable as every other aspect of his controlled personality. Through the kitchen's back window, I watched him sit in his car for several minutes, probably rehearsing the pie. arguments and manipulations he planned to deploy to bring me back into compliance. When he finally entered Harvest Kitchen through the front door, his appearance struck me immediately. David looked smaller somehow, less commanding than the figure who had dominated my thoughts and fears for the past week. His expensive suit and perfectly styled hair seemed out of place in the restaurant's casual warmth, marking him as someone who didn't belong in this world I'd discovered. "Emma," he said, as Marcus guided him to the private dining room, his voice carrying the carefully modulated tone he used when trying to appear reasonable while feeling anything but. "I have to say, this whole dramatic production seems unnecessary. We could have had this conversation at home like civilized people." His opening gambit was classic David, immediately positioning my choice of venue as unreasonable, while implying that his preferred location was the only adult option. But hearing his manipulation tactics now, after a week of being treated with genuine respect, his methods felt almost transparent in their predictability. "I wanted to meet here because this is where I've been working," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I thought you should see what I've been doing with my time instead of rushing home to apologize for having opinions." David's eyes swept the dining room with barely concealed disdain, taking in the exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage tables, and casual atmosphere that was so different from the upscale establishments he preferred. "Working? Emma, let's be realistic about what this is. You're playing restaurant because you're angry with me, but this isn't a career or a future. It's an expensive way to avoid dealing with our actual problems." His dismissal of my week at Harvest Kitchen as playing restaurant sent a flash of anger through me that felt cleaner and more powerful than the confusion and self-doubt I'd experienced during our marriage. I'd worked harder in the past 7 days than in months of managing our household, learned more about my own capabilities than in years of trying to meet his expectations. "What problems are those, David?" I asked, leaning back in my chair with a composure that seemed to surprise him. "The problem where you abandoned me at a restaurant because I suggested supporting local businesses? The problem where you dismiss everything I care about as impractical or embarrassing? Or the problem where you threaten legal action when I don't immediately comply with your demands?" Each question hit its mark, and I watched David's carefully constructed reasonable facade begin to crack. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged directly, and his usual tactics of deflection and reframing weren't working against someone who had spent a week being treated as an intelligent adult capable of making valid observations. "I made a mistake in Italy," David admitted, his tone suggesting this concession was a significant gift I should receive with gratitude. "I was drunk and frustrated, and I reacted poorly to what felt like public criticism of my professional judgment. But running away and hiding in this place for a week isn't a proportional response to one bad decision." His characterization of my time at Harvest Kitchen as running away and hiding revealed how completely he misunderstood what had happened to me. I hadn't been hiding from anything. I'd been discovering who I could become when nobody was limiting my possibilities or requiring me to make myself smaller to accommodate their ego. "I didn't run away, David. I made a choice to explore opportunities you've spent 8 years convincing me I wasn't capable of pursuing." I gestured toward the kitchen where Sophia was pretending to work on inventory while actually monitoring our conversation. "Do you see that woman over there? She's a professional chef who thinks my questions about food are intelligent and my ideas worth considering. When I make mistakes while learning new techniques, she helps me understand what went wrong instead of lecturing me about not being careful enough." David followed my gaze toward Sophia, his expression shifting into the cold calculation I recognized as his assessment mode. "So this is what this is about? You found people who flatter your ego and tell you what you want to hear. And now, you think that's more valuable than a marriage and a life we've built together?" His reduction of genuine respect and encouragement to flattery and ego-stroking illustrated exactly why our marriage had become so suffocating. In David's worldview, any positive feedback I received was suspect unless it came from him, and any growth that didn't serve his interests was inherently selfish. What life did we build together, David? I asked, my voice gaining strength as I articulated thoughts I'd been afraid to voice for years. You built a successful architecture practice while I managed your calendar and hosted dinners that advanced your career. You chose our house, our furniture, our social circle, our vacation destinations. You made every significant decision about our shared life while I provided support and compliance. The accuracy of my assessment clearly stung, because David's reasonable mask slipped completely, revealing the anger that had always lurked beneath his controlled exterior. That's completely unfair, Emma. I consulted you on every major decision. I asked for your input on everything from paint colors to vacation plans. You asked for my opinion and then explained why it was wrong whenever it differed from what you'd already decided. I corrected. That's not consultation, David. That's seeking validation for choices you'd already made. Marcus had been quietly observing our exchange from his position near the kitchen pass. But now he moved closer to our table with the subtle authority he displayed when managing difficult situations during service. His presence wasn't threatening, but it reminded David that this conversation was taking place in a space where I had support and allies. You must be the chef, David said, his tone shifting into the professionally cordial voice he used with service providers. I appreciate you employing my wife during this difficult time, but I think we can resolve our marital issues without involving your business. The casual dismissal of Marcus as merely someone who'd given me a temporary job revealed how completely David misunderstood the relationships I'd formed and the growth I'd experienced. Marcus wasn't just an employer who'd hired me for charity. He was someone who'd recognized my potential and invested time in helping me develop abilities David had never acknowledged I possessed. Actually, Marcus said with the quiet confidence that came from knowing his own worth, Emma isn't just someone we employed temporarily. She's proven herself capable of working at professional standards under pressure. Yesterday, she helped execute a flawless catering service for 150 guests. She's earned a permanent position here if she wants it. The information hit David like a physical blow, his face cycling through surprise, disbelief, and something that looked almost like fear. The possibility that I might have genuinely valuable skills and opportunities outside our marriage clearly hadn't occurred to him as a serious threat to his control. A permanent position doing what exactly? David asked, his voice tight with condescension. Chopping vegetables and washing dishes? Emma has a college degree and comes from a good family. She doesn't need to work in a kitchen to prove anything to anyone. His response revealed everything wrong with our relationship in a single dismissive statement. David measured my worth by my educational credentials and family background, rather than my actual capabilities or interests. The idea that I might find fulfillment in skilled manual labor was incomprehensible to someone who viewed success solely through the lens of social status and financial achievement. I've been learning advanced culinary techniques, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. Sauce work, knife skills, flavor balancing, professional kitchen operations. Yesterday, I helped prepare food that made a bride cry with joy on her wedding day. That matters to me more than hosting another dinner party where you can network with potential clients. David stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language, clearly struggling to reconcile the woman sitting across from him with the compliant wife he thought he'd married. Emma, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're romanticizing manual labor and pretending it's more meaningful than the life we've built together. In 6 months, you'll be tired of the physical demands and ready to come home. His certainty that my newfound passion was temporary revealed how little he understood about what drove me. David had always assumed that my interests were phases, to be tolerated until I returned to supporting his priorities. The possibility that I might have discovered a genuine calling was outside his framework for understanding my personality. Sophia approached our table then, carrying a tray with 3 cups of coffee and a small plate of the pastries that had become my favorite part of each morning at Harvest Kitchen. Her presence was a reminder of the community I'd found and the daily pleasures that came from work that engaged my mind and challenged my abilities. "Emma asked me to prepare these for your meeting," Sophia said, setting the tray on our table with professional grace. "She thought you might enjoy tasting some of the food she's been learning to prepare." The pastries were perfect examples of the craftsmanship I'd been studying, their golden crusts hiding complex flavors developed through techniques that required both scientific understanding and artistic intuition. I'd watched Sophia create them from simple ingredients transformed through skill and attention into something approaching edible art. David examined the offerings with the skeptical expression he reserved for anything that didn't meet his preconceived standards. "Thank you, but I already ate lunch. I'm sure they're fine for what they are." His dismissal of Sophia's work without even tasting it encapsulated everything I'd grown to hate about his approach to life. David judged experiences based on whether they fit his established preferences rather than remaining open to discovery and surprise. His closed-mindedness extended to food, art, people, and apparently his own wife's potential for growth. "Try one," I insisted, pushing the plate toward him. "Just taste it and tell me what you think." Reluctantly, David selected a small almond croissant and took a careful bite, his expression suggesting he was performing an unpleasant obligation rather than experiencing something created with passion and skill. But as the flavors developed on his palate, I saw surprise flicker across his features before he suppressed it behind his familiar mask of polite indifference. "It's well made," he admitted grudgingly. "But Emma, making pastries isn't a career path for someone with your background in education. This is a nice hobby, but it's not practical as a long-term plan." His reduction of my week of intensive learning to making pastries and a nice hobby crystallized everything I needed to understand about our fundamental incompatibility. David would never see my culinary interests as legitimate because they didn't advance his version of our shared success. My growth and fulfillment were secondary to maintaining the lifestyle and social position he'd decided we should pursue. "David," I said, reaching into my purse for the envelope I'd prepared, "that morning, I filed for divorce. These papers formally request dissolution of our marriage with an equitable division of assets and no request for spousal support." The shock on his face was complete and genuine, suggesting that despite my week of absence and clear statements about needing time to think, he'd never seriously considered that I might choose to end our marriage. His worldview apparently couldn't accommodate the possibility that someone would voluntarily give up the security and comfort he provided. "Emma, you can't be serious. Divorce? Over a restaurant job and some hurt feelings about one bad night?" His voice carried a note of panic that I'd never heard before, the sound of someone whose certainty about controlling outcomes was being challenged by reality. "This isn't about one bad night or one job," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt delivering news that would reshape both our lives. "This is about 8 years of making myself smaller to accommodate your need to be larger. This is about discovering that I'm capable of growth and learning and contribution when I'm with people who value those qualities, instead of trying to suppress them." David leaned forward across the table, his voice dropping into the intimate tone he used when trying to manipulate me through appeals to our shared history. "Emma, think about what you're throwing away. Our house, our financial security, our friends, our plans for the future. Are you really willing to sacrifice all of that for the approval of people you've known for a week?" His framing of divorce as throwing away everything good in our life while reducing my new relationships to mere approval-seeking was textbook emotional manipulation. But hearing his tactics now, after experiencing genuine respect and encouragement, they felt as ineffective as trying to control the weather through wishful thinking. "I'm not throwing anything away, David. I'm choosing something better. I'm choosing work that challenges me, relationships based on mutual respect, and a future where my growth isn't seen as a threat to someone else's ego." I stood up from the table, feeling taller and stronger than I had in years. I'm choosing to become the person I was meant to be before I learned to make myself acceptable to you. The finality in my voice seemed to penetrate David's shock, and I watched him cycle through the stages of someone whose primary strategy had failed completely. Confusion gave way to anger, anger to attempted bargaining, and finally to a cold fury that revealed the person he'd always been beneath his civilized facade. "Fine," he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "If you want to destroy our marriage for kitchen work and the attention of people who don't know you like I do, that's your choice. But don't expect this to be easy or pleasant. I'll make sure you get exactly what you deserve from this divorce." His threat was meant to intimidate me back into compliance, but instead it confirmed that I'd made the right decision. The man I'd married would never support my independence because my growth threatened his control. His final words revealed that he'd never loved me for who I was, only for how well I served his vision of what our life should look like. "I'm sure you will," I replied calmly. "But I'm not afraid of fair consequences for choosing my own happiness over your comfort. I'd rather struggle as myself than succeed as someone else's idea of who I should be." Marcus had moved closer during our final exchange, positioning himself within reach if David's anger escalated beyond verbal threats. His protective presence reminded me that I no longer faced David's intimidation tactics alone. I had allies who valued my well-being and would support my choices even when they led to difficult transitions. David stood abruptly, his movement sharp with barely controlled fury. "I hope this works out exactly as well as you deserve, Emma. I hope you enjoy washing dishes and taking orders from people who couldn't succeed in any business that actually matters." His parting shot was designed to plant seeds of doubt about my decision and the people who'd supported it, but his petty cruelty only reinforced how much healthier my life would be without his constant negativity and control. The man walking out of Harvest Kitchen bore no resemblance to the partner I'd thought I'd married, revealing how completely I'd been living with an illusion of my own creation. As the door closed behind David and his Mercedes pulled out of the parking area, I felt something inside me settle into place permanently. The woman who had sat frozen in the Sterling a week ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept treatment that diminished it. Sophia approached the table where I was still standing, her expression mixing concern with admiration. "How do you feel?" "Free," I answered without hesitation. Terrified about the practical details, but free in a way I haven't felt since I was 22 and thought I could do anything. Marcus joined us, his smile carrying pride and something that looked like relief. "What do you want to do now?" The question was beautiful in its simplicity, focused on my desires rather than obligations or expectations. For the first time in 8 years, I could answer based purely on what would make me happy and fulfilled, rather than what would maintain someone else's approval. "I want to learn everything you're willing to teach me about professional cooking," I said, looking around the dining room that had become the birthplace of my new life. "I want to work hard and get better every day, and see how far I can grow when nobody's limiting my possibilities." "Then that's exactly what we'll do," Marcus replied. "Welcome to your new life, Emma. Let's see what you're really capable of when you're free to find out." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.